name's Paul Stratford with HMI Cardinal. Today we're going to be covering the SKYLINE Empire Series installation. We're going to give you some great pointers and tips, so stick with us and we'll get right to it. One thing we want to cover real quick on the SKYLINE Empire Series, we basically want to make sure you kind of take a quick inventory of what you've got before you leave the shop, just to make sure that you have all the simple tools required to complete an installation. One nice thing about the Empire, everything comes in a nice, well-organized box. Everything that was in this slot is actually the hardware pack. You can see all your Allen wrenches for all the various sizes of set screws and everything that come with this door are included with it in every one, as well as your mounting pucks. There's 3 different types of anchors here. There's 2 different kinds of hollow wall, one for masonry, one for tile, and then of course there's obviously a screw if you've got stud behind your wall for a standard installation. There's a couple other things here you're going to need. Obviously the basic drill gun, as well as a drill bit to drill your holes. These are some of the bits that we offer currently, a spear point or a core bit, which are great, or if you have a very hard surface like a porcelain tile or granite. In a lot of cases a standard masonry bit will do just fine as well. Some simple things, we've brought tape because today our install is on dark tile, and a lot of times if you're making pencil marks on dark tile, they're very hard to relocate, just to make your life a little easier. And then of course a couple of the silicone products that we offer. Our standard construction grade silicone with the antimicrobial, and then ultra clear, which you might want to consider on a job like this. Some other installation aids that we offer, the Empire Series has to be measured basically like a standard frameless unit. We offer a shim kit here which will help aid in measuring, especially if you're training somebody, is very helpful. And then the plumb perfect level that we offer is an option too, which we'll get into a little bit more in the video on how that can help prevent errors and make an easier installation. Now, the first thing we want to cover is the SKYLINE Empire Series needs to be measured exactly like a standard frameless shower door. There can be sometimes a common misconception that because it's a sliding door that there's a lot of extra play in it. This door is still a custom unit and will be made to fit your opening. So the very first thing that you need to do is establish where the door is going to set by establishing your center line on your curve. Now in this particular case, I'm going to need to mark it so that later during install we can transfer our lines up the wall for where our header mounts or our track mounts. But in this particular case, I'm going to put down some simple white removable masking tape here because we're marking on very dark tile and a pencil line would be very hard to see. Now one thing I've done, and I'll show you, is just a simple turn over the end of it, just so that when you get ready to finish, the entire piece isn't stuck down and it easily peels away for easy removal. Now the first thing we want to do is establish our center line. We've got an overall curb width of 5 1/4, so 2 5/8 is our halfway. And you always want to double check yourself by checking it from the other side. Now in some situations where maybe they wanted more room in the shower, you might have it offset to the outside. Just make sure that you make a note for the installer so that they install the unit in the correct place on the curb. The next thing we want to do is transfer our level line up the wall, making sure that we know exactly where our door is going to mount. Also making sure that we double check the level to make sure we're plumb. Now we want to start to establish anything that's out of level or plumb. Now this is the plumb perfect level, also available from HMI Cardinal. A couple of nice features about this level: it's fully adjustable from 52 inches out to 8 feet. Comes in very handy if you're measuring things like steam doors or custom mirrors or anything that's in the glass industry that's precision. It can actually have, these are completely removable. If you had to take it down to a 4-foot level, they can individually be used as levels. As you notice, one set up for horizontal and one set up for vertical, and then of course you're left with a standard basic 4-foot level. But the real true genius of the plumb perfect design is it makes reading outages incredibly simple. By simply placing these both back on here, I can basically place my level at whatever the height my shower is going to, total height, place it firmly against the wall, and using the built-in feeler gauges, I can crank it all the way out to where my bubble is level, and then simply look at the easy to read gauge in either inches or millimeters. And I can see based on this wall leans out 5/16 of an inch. It doesn't get much simpler than that. The same thing can also be accomplished with our measuring feeler gauges. By simply adding in gauges until your level shows plumb again, you can very easily determine that this wall was out 1/16 of an inch. Now, one thing a lot of people don't realize is that levels are very easy to check for true. We recommend checking them several times a week, especially if you're measuring a lot of precision glass. The very easiest thing to do is put your level on any vertical surface, and it's actually easy if you use our feeler gauges here. Now we can see that with an 1/8 inch shim, we show dead level. If I turn the level over, and with that same 1/8 inch shim, it reads level, it's correct. The same can be done on the curb to balance the horizontal. Just simply measure, if it's correct, turn it over, and you'll know if your level's true. Now, one thing we want to make sure is that our curb is level, but not in just one way. It is critical that the width of it is level, or at least we know how much it's out. Even though this is a sliding door, there is still some adjustment for an outage, up to 3/8 of an inch, but that will actually be cut out of the glass. So this dimension is critical, but what's really critical, as on all frameless shower doors, is the pitch of the curb. We basically want to make sure that the curb is pitched back in. If it's pitched out, which if you look at the way this level shows it, the tile's actually running down to the outside. This effect would actually channel water out of the shower, which would create a much bigger leak hazard than if it was rolled to the inside and basically gravity helped all the water go back to the inside. This is critical not just on this unit, but on all frameless shower doors. It's one of the biggest things that causes leaks, so it's one of the first things you want to check. Now, I know there's an old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Even the simplest of pictures can greatly aid us in making sure that your shower is produced accurately. This doesn't have to be done with any kind of fancy ruler as far as drawing the picture. We just need a basic idea of exactly what you're looking at. One thing, always try and make sure that you establish which side the shower head's on in case there's a question on it. But as far as putting once we've done our drawing, we've already measured everything. Now, if you remember, we had a 1/16 inch outage here. We could also represent this in a couple of different ways. It could just label it as a 1/16 inch out, or even down here we could label it as a 1/16 of an inch in. These all three mean the same thing. But for sake of ease, this is actually the way most of our heavy glass units have to be entered into our software. So that is going to be the way we basically want them to come in all cases, just for uniformity. Now, as far as the accuracy of these lines, it doesn't really make much difference. We just want to make sure our outages are all on there. Now, once we start to measure, which we've already done, we want to make sure that all of these outages add up to our dimensions. So at the bottom we had 59 and 5/16, and at the top we came up with 59 and 11/16. You do get extra marks for penmanship, which you can see here. That's a total outage of 3/8 of an inch, which 11/16 minus 5/16 would be 3/8 of an inch. So these two numbers correspond with all these outages, saying that this is accurate. Now, on this kind of door, this outage on the bottom also makes a big difference. Biggest thing is most people are just going to give us, okay, I want a 75 inch unit. Just know that if you put this on here and this says 3/16, we're going to assume that this side is 74 and 13/16. This will come into play a little bit more during installation as far as setting your header location, and we'll get into that in a bit. Now, we've gone ahead and drilled our hole, but I just want to show you how we came to this dimension. If you remember, during our measure, we actually had pulled a plumb line straight up from the curb to our center line. So we've left that mark here. Now, one thing to keep in mind, we ended up with an 80 inch tall unit. Our dimension for our header is actually 3 9/16 of an inch shorter than our overall unit height. So we have an overall unit height of 80, 1, 2, 3, and you can see here we're actually at 9/16. So that is our dimension to the center of our header puck, which is what's going to mount to this hole. You can see that, just so you can see clearly before we put a screw in there, this hole is elliptical. So as long as you are very, very close, there will be a finite amount of adjustment to fine tune the function of the door once the puck's installed. Now in this particular case, we're not sure that there's a stud back here. We didn't hit anything solid when we drilled our hole. So we're going to go ahead and use the standard masonry anchor that this kit comes with. This one just happened to be gray. Once this is driven down, we'll fill this with silicone and then we'll apply our screw, but we'll apply it through our actual puck. Now you just want to basically snug this up. It's not necessary to torque it down 100% at this point. You want to leave a little bit of play in it so that you can fine tune your bar during final installation. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and get our rolling assembly for our header installed. First thing we want to do is put what will eventually become our stops for our sliding door. Go ahead and put both of these on. Now one thing you can do, as I've done in the past, just to prevent this from slipping off if you accidentally tilt the bar one way or the other, is just a simple piece of tape is all it takes to keep those from getting in your way, or very dangerously falling and cracking a piece of customer's tile. Now once we have those on, we have our two ends. Now if you'll notice, there's set screws top and bottom. The single set screw goes to our wall pucks that are already installed, and our double set screw is what actually is going to hold our bar in place. Now if you notice too, one side of this is flat. In this particular installation, we have our fixed glass on this side and our door is on the inside. So we're actually going to set this so that the flat part is to the door, whichever side the door is on. And we'll go ahead and put these on. Sometimes you have to back these set screws out a little bit in order to allow the puck to go all the way down. As you can see, there's actually about a 1/4 inch air gap in between the puck and the end of the bar. This is to allow for some fine tuning during final adjustment. You'll see as we set the panel glass that it's actually through on these pucks on the bar, and this will actually allow you a little bit of fine tuning to make sure that those holes get into alignment. At this time, you're just going to tighten the set screws up against the puck. You're going to leave these bar screws loose so that you can adjust back and forth. You don't want to back them out too far, because the last thing you would ever want to happen, keep in mind you can spin it so it's easier to see, but the last thing you would want to happen is back one of these off too far and it come out and fall and go down the drain. And there, now you can see we've got all the way flush. Now one thing you'll notice, like we talked about before, the pucks that are actually mounted on the bar are going to protrude through the glass. Now these little guys here, which are your door stops, this one is not as critical because it'll be down here on the bar, but I like to go ahead and turn them in the up position, and as I put that tape on there to keep them from sliding off, I'll also use that to hold it in the upright position, because once this panel glass is on here, there won't be any room to flip this part over. It's just something real simple just to hold that in place without affecting the rest of the installation. Now one of the last things before you actually come over and test fit your Sidelight panel, you want to make sure that you remove the caps where they're actually going to penetrate through the glass. Another thing you want to make sure of on this is that you can see there's actually a cushion that will be on the back side of the glass. Make sure that it does not come off. It's this piece right here, and then there's another one that'll be on the outside once the cap is put back on. And then the last thing you want to make sure is you have something soft to set on. A 1/16th to an 1/8 inch setting block is ideal. The deduction's right around a 1/16th of an inch. This will give us a little bit of cushion, protect our corners while we're setting it down, and then we can shim it around into place from there. One thing we're going to go ahead and do, because the door sits on the inside, on the shower head side, we're going to go ahead and set it in the shower just to make it more convenient so we don't have to try and jockey it around the panel once we've got it set. As you can see, I've got my holes aligned up top for my rollers, my handle to that correct side. And what I've done is, every piece of glass from us comes with some edge protectant on it. I went ahead and left it on the top and the bottom as I've unwrapped the glass, just so I can go ahead and set it in here and not have to worry about it getting damaged. We'll go ahead and set the glass in the shower. to make sure you leave a good lean on it, but put it back far enough where it's out of your way so you don't accidentally bump into it. Set our bar back to the right position. Bring in our panel glass. Now if you've noticed, down at the bottom here, we've gone ahead and set those blocks down. Just don't forget to put those in. Now you want to take notice that I'm making sure my panel's aligned correctly with my wall mount holes to the correct wall, and then here's my holes for my puck. I'll go ahead and set this down. I'm going to get John Bikey, also with Cardinal here, to help me get the pucks aligned. As you can see, they're almost perfect, but we talked about that's why we had that little bit of fine tuning. There we go. Now we just need to get our caps on. Now the last thing we want to do, we're just going to basically, not even really finger tight, just basically install these caps just barely snugged up against the glass, because we want to be able to move it around for shimming if need be. One thing we've noticed since we've set the panel on equal blocks here, and it's something you have to keep in mind too, these blocks could be sitting at any odd spot on the actual tile itself, not really accounting for the overall outage. But what we've ended up with is about an 1/8 inch gap here on the wall. So what we would like to do is basically raise this side and lower this side, which will turn the piece of glass, which will bring us in tight to our wall, and then it'll help close our gap on the bottom. Now there's a couple of different ways to do that. Obviously you can trim down blocks. Use little pieces of clear polycarbonate, anything to get down to what you need. Cut these in half, or in this particular case, because my grout line's actually lower, I'm actually just going to drop my block down into that grout line before I cut it off, and you can see how much that's closed up that gap. Now once we've got our panel set, we want to go ahead and make sure we check it for plumb so that we can mark our holes with our hardware for our wall mount hardware. If you're doing this installation by yourself, it's a little easier to get these installed if you go ahead and tape the outside portion on, just so that when you line it up on the inside, you don't have to work around it, and that way you also don't have to worry about dropping the little rubber gasket. Now you want to make sure that you leave the rubber gasket on that side and on this side, so you have it on both sides of the glass. And then carefully align and get your screw started. Don't be worried if the tape gets a little bit loose. That's one of the reasons you want to put a pretty long piece of tape on it. That'll give you a little bit of flexibility as far as getting everything lined up. There's the first one. Once your bracket's installed, you want to go ahead and mark your hole. This could be another situation too where we've got dark tile, and in this case we're using a black marker. We're putting a little piece of the white masking tape up behind there. Will make it a lot easier to see your hole when you take that bracket back off. Hopefully we'll be able to drill these holes without taking our panel down, which is the way this unit's designed to install. Now in most instances you should be able to drill this hole without removing the panel. Since we've got some hard tile here, we're going to use one of our spear bits. You want to get it aligned. And then usually what I like to do is just push in a hair just to get it started. You can hear it start cutting. Now anytime you use something for a hard surface, you want to use a little bit of water as coolant. Easy as that. Now sometimes if you've used water, when you clear these holes out, you want to make sure that you give them a second to dry. You always want to fill your holes with silicone before you either push the anchor in or run the screw through. If you do it now while it's still soaking wet, the silicone will skim coat and it won't actually adhere. The good thing is, even with the water, there still should be enough friction there to generate enough heat to dry that hole fairly quickly. Once you've got your new anchor in the wall and you've got it filled with silicone, so I've got a helper here. I'm going to go ahead and have him put his hand on that just to make things a little bit easier. And I'm not going to tighten it all the way up. Now we've got our hole drilled with our anchor in it. We filled our anchor with silicone. We've got our cover on the outside partially screwed on. We've left it loose here so that we've got a little room to make sure we get this screw in. Once your anchor is in place, simply install with the provided screw and anchor or straight into the stud if there is one. Snug down firmly, then tighten your set screw to make sure that your panel's clasped firmly. At this point we're going to go ahead and install the top roller hangers. One thing I want you to notice, unlike the previous SKYLINE, this has got a little bit different lobe system. You can see where this is offset. That's going to be for actually raising the door up and down on the left or the right to actually true it in the opening. But it is, as you'll see, much easier to use than the old system. Make sure you keep the grommet inside the glass hole to prevent a binding. Just snug them up until you've got them all on. As you can see, the cams are offset on these new rollers. They're done a little bit different than the old one. It makes them a lot easier to adjust, as you'll see when we fine tune this. I'm going to go ahead and finish up by putting the top two rollers on so we can temporarily hang the door to align the bottom guide. Now I'm going to go ahead and set my door up onto the rail. We've still got our edge protector on the bottom, but because the bottom of the door is still free swinging, it'll be very easy to remove shortly. We're not that concerned about our stop location at this point. This is strictly an alignment. Now what we've done is we've made a mark here on our curb at 1 9/16 reveal, which is what our reveal at the very top is. So I'm just going to pull my glass out from the inside to my mark, and then I'm going to leave myself about 1/8 of an inch reveal behind my center guide. Then I'll simply hold it in place and mark around one side of it so that I will have an accurate reference where it sits. Now that I've got my guide marked, I'm going to just set it back in place, line it up, and mark my holes so that it's a lot easier to get the guide centered. Now one thing you have to understand, we use the same center guide for several different types of heavy sliding doors. This has had a cammed piece inside of it that's actually adjustable for 10 or 8 millimeter glass. If you've got a 1/2 inch unit and it's extremely tight rolling, it's probably on the wrong setting. What that does is that changes the angle here. You can see now that I have this on 10 and this is 3/8 how loose this is. So we basically want to make sure, in this case, since we have 3/8 glass, it's on 8, which allows it for it to be much tighter. You can see at this point, before we've got our center guide mounted, we're getting ready to rehang our door. I'm going to go ahead and move the stops. You saw I took my tape off. Go ahead and move them all the way out. They'll be on the outside of both sets of rollers. This will obviously be the back stop and the front stop against this one. And we're going to very carefully set our door into the guide and back into place. Alright, now that we've gone ahead and tightened up all our set screws on the pucks and on the bar so that everything's fixed, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put our lower rollers on so that we can go ahead and fully capture the door so that we don't have any jumping of the track. Now once we've adjusted our bottom rollers up to where they're just almost touching, so we've got no ability for the door to jump off of the roller track, we're going to go ahead and set our bump stops so that our door is approximately 1/8 inch from the wall. Now one thing we want to make sure is we've got these straight up and down so that the rubber grommet hits dead inside the grooved track on the roller. There you can see we've got our 1/8 inch with the light hit, and then I'm going to go ahead and put the extra torque on it just to make sure it's set. Now one of the other reasons you want to make sure your bottom rollers are tight is when this top roller hits this, if these are not snug enough, the door could actually kick over and the bottom could hit. So you want to make sure these are just about touching perfectly. Now, one of the last things we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and install the recessed pull handle. It's a two-part piece. Make sure you've got the rubber grommet on both sides of it. And pretty simple installation. That's all there is to it. Now you've got something to get a hold of the door with. Now there are a couple of optional seal kits for this unit. In this particular configuration, water shouldn't be much of an issue, but some people might be extra concerned about safety, even though the unit does have a good solid stop. But there is a push-on edge gasket that is available, which will give it a nice soft cushion stop. One of the things you want to do, one of the best ways to align these is to not push them completely down. Leave them off the edge of the glass about 1/8 of an inch. And firmly shut the door a few times. What that'll do is that'll set each section of it in the correct place so that you get the best seal. Now the other seal kit that's available is this long dual durometer piece that's actually got a soft vinyl. You want to cut it 5 inches short of your overall height, and that's so that it will clear this backstop. This one you want to just go ahead and push it all the way on. And then that will actually drag on your panel and give you a nice secure seal over your door gate.